Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door is home to over 80 different badges. With each having its own unique effect, there is bound to be badges that are worse than others, whether the effect is just not good, or the badge fails to stand out due to other tools just outclassing it. A classic example is the unpopular Pity Flower. Whenever Mario takes damage, he occasionally restores 1 FP. 30% of the time to be exact. This badge is borderline worthless. For 3 BP, you may as well just equip an FP plus and take a guaranteed extra 5 FP, since a 30% chance of gaining only 1 FP in response to an attack that can do as much as 20 damage is just not reasonable. Trade-off badges are not worth it when the bad actively outweighs the good. It's why the HP drain badges are so unpopular, and even those badges are at least consistent in what they do. Of course, this also asks the question, how would we make this badge actually worth using? This can be done by making the badge's effect more powerful, making the badge available earlier, or giving the badge a different function. For Pity Flower, it wouldn't need much, just to make the badge a guarantee to restore FP. Making the badge actually consistently work would go a long way in making the effect more appealing, since it'd have genuine synergy with low HP badges, and it feels more like a proper exchange when you're trading HP for FP. You could even make the FP restored upon taking damage be increased if attacks are strong enough. This is just one example of how a badge can be improved, and we've still got several more to discuss what they do, why they're bad, and how they could be made better. A prime example of a badge that desperately warrants a makeover is Lucky Start, which for 3 turns grants Mario either HP or FP regen, Electrified, or Dodgy status at the very start of a battle. For 4 BP, this effect is awful. The HP and FP effects are actually strictly worse than just the dedicated extra HP or FP that plus badges would give, since this badge uses up one of its turns before you get to act in the start of a battle. And since your likely starting battle's fully healed, you only restore 4 points as opposed to 6. You likewise wouldn't want to rely on it giving you Electrified, as that tap costs less BP and lasts permanently, and Dodgy is not only unreliable even after it appears, but this is a game which rewards playing around how bosses can hurt you, and if you don't care about that, you're likely trying to superguard everything. So in all likelihood, you're playing in a way where this status wouldn't protect you at all. For where you get it, and how you're rewarded this badge, I see no reason why this badge couldn't give you actually good status buffs. So I suggest a 1 in 3 chance to see Mario be given fast, invisible, or allergic statuses at the start of a battle. Fast especially would be a great status to make available, as you see it in only 2 boss battles where Macho Grubba and Belladum can cast it. It gives the target the ability to attack twice in a single turn, and would be a very fun status to use. Invisible is more common but still good, and allergic is really only there so that this badge has more risk associated with it. And who doesn't like a little extra chaos now and again? It blocks all incoming statuses, whether good or bad, and is therefore more neutral. And it's otherwise only ever seen when fighting either the Shadow Queen or when eating space food, so more common than fast, but still rarer than invisible. TTYD generally favors jumping as opposed to hammering, with how damage tends to scale better with attacks that hit multiple times. Hammerman, as a result, is the worst badge for it. It removes Mario's ability to choose jumping actions in battle in exchange for increasing his hammer attack power by 1. It's a good badge in situations where your jump is the poor option, but TTYD makes jumping a good option overwhelmingly often thanks to Mario's partners and special moves like Earth Tremor being able to pick up the slack. And it really only makes sense to power up the attack with a higher potential for damage, which Mario's jump will always have over his hammer, especially when several badges later in the game like Ice Power and Spike Shield exist to remove Jump's only real weakness. Hammerman, as a result, never sees any genuine use when Jumpman is strictly better. The way I see it, unless you're challenging yourself, you're only going to use one or the other in battle. And you can't buff Hammerman too much without making it look strange next to Jumpman, considering it's meant to be its counterpart. So I would like to suggest we fuse Jumpman and Hammerman together and make it so that when equipped, Mario can perform both actions in battle. However, when Mario chooses one move to attack with, the other move is grayed out and is unusable for the rest of the fight. If you've ever played Pokemon before and you use a held item like the Choice Band, our theoretical badge would function similarly to that, and it'd take effect even as soon as Mario delivering a first strike. Let's call the badge Power Pledge. When you're new to the game, not knowing what you're up against can make a first-time playthrough a challenge in itself, and so you're encouraged to tattle enemies and bosses, which gives you information on them and displays their current HP. Though once you gain access to Peekaboo, enemy HP is just always visible when this badge is equipped. It's another in the line of convenience, but if you play to complete, this badge isn't really worth anything but an entry in your badge journal. It's also of little help to players with experience, as odds are you'll already have enemy and boss stats memorized, and so the badge doesn't really do anything for you. One idea to buff this badge actually comes from a difficulty mod called Hero Mode, and it'd be to allow Goombella's tattle as a free action once per turn if she hasn't acted yet. So basically, if she does anything but tattles first, her turn is over, but if she tattles, she can act again before her turn is up. This would make playing to completion easier, as you're no longer sacrificing a better action for the sake of filling out your tattle log. And with the new tattle check button, you can even make sure to avoid duplicate tattles on enemies you already have information on. It'd make the star pieces you'd have to spend to get this badge feel a lot more worthwhile. By the way, if you're enjoying this video, please remember to click the like button. Much love. Badges that depend on RNG to actually work tend to be among the worst badges in the game. We already talked about Pity Flower, but there's also Happy Heart P, and Happy Flower, which all restore 1 point of their respective stats 33% of the time. Pretty harmless filler at their core, especially Happy Flower, but they're badges that vary a ton as to how often they activate, and generally, you're better off not bothering to equip them as long as you have anything else that you know will work for you. 2 BP is a lot for badges that likely will give you less value than the dedicated HP and FP Plus badges, and for regular enemy fights, you're much better off with the Heart and Flower Finder badges, since not only do they always give you something after a battle, but you get more value for hearts, since one will heal both Mario and his partner. It helps that there's no shortage of guaranteed strategies to take bosses down, and once you're at a high enough level, happy badges often just serve to get in the way unless you know you're not relying on low HP strategies. How I'd buff these would be by having the badges activate at a consistent rate. Plus 1 HP or FP every 2 or 3 turns would go a long way in making these badges deliver more value, as that's actually something you can plan around. It mirrored what the HP and TP core medals did in Blood Fables, and with how good those medals are in that game, it's reasonable that the happy badges would be much better in TTYD if made reliable. However, I'd also make the P variant's turn counter reset if swapped out, so they'd have to remain active for several turns in a row to benefit from the P variant, something to punish quick change users. In the Pit of 100 Trials, there are many badges to discover. Most are great, others are mediocre, and then there's Bump Attack. This badge costs 5 BP and has Mario instantly defeat enemies that don't reward star points. This depends on the level difference between Mario and the enemy found on the field, so for example, normal Goombas instantly die when Mario's level is 8 or more. This badge has no business being located in the Pit of 100 Trials, let alone all the way down in level 80. The sign explaining the pit up and says first attack and bump attack badges don't even work here, so one of your rewards is a badge that's completely non-functional, and it's barely any more convenient than first attack is. Bear in mind that first attack's BP cost is literally free, so realistically, bump attack should be 2. Also put it somewhere else and another badge in its place. It would fit perfectly fine as a crane reward in Chapter 7's X-Not Fortress, for example. Much better than Feeling Fine, which is available ridiculously late, and would benefit significantly from being made available earlier with all of the status items enemies can hold, in addition to Bonetail's Breath. And speaking of Feeling Fine, so this badge costs 4 BP and protects Mario from negative status ailments. Not all of them, but stuff like Tiny, Dizzy, Confused, Stop, Sleep, you get the idea. As a concept, this badge is actually fairly solid. Status ailments are typically a big nuisance to be hit by, and Chapter 8 does see you get hit by some pretty bad ones from bosses if you're not careful. However, in execution, most sources of status ailments for the rest of the game can be avoided by simply guarding the attack, which would really be the only sensible option for moves like Gromodus' Time Stop, Baladum's Poison Magic, and the Shadow Queen's Dangerous Breath. Sure, guards won't protect you from items, but by Chapter 7, you're most certainly going to be able to one-shot enemies in spite of that, thanks to special moves like Art Attack and Partner Attacks that strike all enemies at once. So Feeling Fine becomes a crutch as opposed to something actually useful. I'd actually rather place Feeling Fine in the Pit of 100 Trials, where you'd find Bump Attack on level 80. It would find plenty of opportunity thanks to enemies like Spunnias, and elite wizards potentially holding sleep Sleepy Sheep, and other status items, and would be in a great spot for when the player confronts Bonetail at the very bottom. Since the pit can be challenged and potentially cleared before even fighting Hooktail, this would be a fantastic aid for challenge runners attempting it early. You'd only need Mario's copy too, as it'd allow him to always be able to protect his partners should they fall victim, and it'd help make runs feel less up to luck. Let's talk about Hammer Throw. This badge sees Mario throw his hammer to deal damage to any enemy on screen. It also ignores defense, but it has its damage locked to 2 points without added attack power, even if your hammer is more powerful. This piercing effect was seen as a buff at first, but the truth is that its piercing is borderline meaningless. This is because there are so few enemies that are out of reach of Mario's hammer where you would use this badge as opposed to jumping, especially when Spike's shield up and removes Hammer's one and only edge against jumps. It's also naturally going to be unappealing to use FP solely to be able to do damage with nothing else going for it. And unlike Power Smash, it isn't even like the FP is going into doing more damage, it's just to do damage at all. With this in mind, buffing Hammer Throw by merely making it deal more damage wouldn't sit right, as it will always be outclassed by jumping. So instead, let's turn it into an entirely new badge. Let's call it Chuckster, because Super Mario Sunshine. When Chuckster is equipped, Mario throws his hammer for all standard hammer swinging moves. So not just his normal hammer, but also Power Smash, Ice Smash, Piercing Blow, and Head Rattle. We can also restore Hammer Throw's normal damage scaling with Mario's current hammer, but remove the effect of Piercing Defense, as that's what Piercing Blow would be for. This would be huge, as it also buff other bad badges that suffer from poor range and make Hammerman challenges more strategic. I should say though that a mod called Tower of Trials exists, and my idea here is actually something JDS64 came up with to buff Hammerman. It's a neat idea, but I didn't want to take his idea verbatim because that feels like I'd be stealing from him. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. As far as bad badges go, I think Super Appeal Peak desperately needs to be looked at. This badge increases the yield of star power when your partner appeals on their turn by 0.25 or 1/4 of 1 unit. Since you get this badge in Chapter 2, this badge really has no business ever being used when partners always have something better they can do. If a partner can't attack, you're most likely going to switch them out for another. It is true that Super Appeals are better when used by the partner, since only Mario can use special moves, but that doesn't mean anything if the badge isn't available for where you'd actually want it, while Mario's Super Appeal is available in the badge shop as early as the prologue. All the P variant would need is to be made available in the prologue. It seems like a negligible buff, but it would mean it'd be usable for the earliest Pit of 100 Trials challenges, and that's better than nothing, especially when you can't buy this badge as freely as Mario's copy, and so there's no 31 Super Appeal shenanigans you can do to flood Mario with star power. Speaking of the audience, it would mean a lot to me if you felt like sharing some cash by becoming a channel member. I don't have much to offer, but I'll read out your names like I'm doing now with MD Switchy and Nintendo 60Jorts. And if you can't, at least subscribe. Much love. In a similar vein to the Happy Badges, we have another 3-for-1 deal with HP Drain, FP Drained, and HP Drain P. The former two drop Mario's attack power by 1 and restore 1 HP or FP per successfully damaging jump or hammer attack, while the partner variant does the same for partner attack and partner HP. Admittedly, FP Drain isn't that bad since it pairs well with Flower Saver and doesn't interfere with rush badges, but you still have to really try and make this badge work. And both HP Drains are typically just mediocre at best and downright bad at worst, and that's because TTYD is a game that favors offense much more than defense. Reducing your own attack power often leads to battles taking longer to actually win, and you'll have to endure more enemy attacks as a result. Not helped by the fact that gaining only 1 HP is pretty useless for where you get these badges. The obvious buff is to have these badges restore stats according to how many times a move actually hits a target, like how HP Drain worked in the original Paper Mario, and boosting the BP cost accordingly. But I actually want to propose another type of buff. In Bug Fables, there's a medal called Life Stealer that drops the equipped bug's attack by 1 and restores HP equal to half the damage dealt by the first hit rounded down. This heal also takes effect before the second and onward hits land, and so it would interfere with rush badges if healed out of range. A buff like this would actually make hammers better for defensive play, and would benefit partners like Flurry, where Lip Lock would be even more potent for keeping her health high. And having at least the potential to restore more than 1 HP definitely would grant these badges at least some type of synergy with the rush badges. This will probably be a more controversial addition to this video, but one badge that I think could be buffed is Simplifier. It's a badge that reduces how much star power you get when you perform action commands in exchange for making them easier to execute. Since action commands are easy to consistently hit, the effect of this badge is purely detrimental, and you wouldn't equip it unless you were either playing with unbearably bad input delay, you just don't typically play video games, or you really want an 8 HP shell shield. It doesn't even make power bounce's 4th bounce any easier to hit, which is probably the biggest reason you'd want to equip a badge geared towards easier action commands. And if it's not that, it's easier guards and super guards, which you need 2 copies to have any effect on those. However, I'm ignoring all of that for how I'd buff this badge. Simply put, in addition to easier action commands, I would also increase the probability of status elements taking effect for moves that check for Simplifier, effectively multiplying the odds of a status activating by either 10% with 1 or 20% with 2. This may be a buff that flies over the head of a more casual player, but it makes status elements more reliable and opens the door to play around with stuff like Soft Stomp more. I am not really too worried about buffing Sleepy Stomp or other potentially game-breaking badges, since it's pretty silly that bosses like the Shadow Queen can be put to sleep in the first place, and statuses like Shrink and Soft would benefit more from the multiplier, as being more likely to work in general already means they're more reliable. And if people really want to break the game wide open, Danger Mario is right there regardless. The inverse could be done for Unsimplifier, but I think we can just ignore that. That way you can equip both and only increase the chance of status elements activating for as little as 2 BP. A badge that deserves no introduction, Return Postage is an absolute disgrace. Costing 7 BP, this badge allows Mario to redirect direct attacks back at his attacker for half the damage they deal to him, rounded down. So an attack doing 7 damage would receive 3 back. Considering both that this badge is the reward for conquering the pit of 100 trials, and there likely is just nothing left to clear afterwards, and if you're able to get this badge before beating the game, you're definitely already good enough to beat the main adventure, the reward should likewise be something incredible to reflect the journey needed to get it. So instead of an effect that will basically never come in handy, Return Postage should reflect all incoming damage and status elements back at the attacker, regardless of being direct or indirect. It will act as an extension of Mario's Super Guard, except it is always active, and works even against attacks that are programmed to be impossible to Super Guard, like Marilyn's Lightning and Pokeball Explosions. An overpowered reward can only be a fair wage when it also serves as a culmination for an entire journey as difficult as the pit, and this buff would reflect that very well. This last badge is so close to being good, but it's not quite there. And the sad thing is, Tornado Jump actually did see some notable buffs in the Switch remake. This badge has Mario jump on a single target where he can fire off tornadoes, doing 2 damage to all airborne foes, even ignoring invisibility. With how weak the tornadoes actually are, this badge is a bad option that's outclassed before even getting it, as multi-bounce costs less BP, needs less FP to use, and each jumping hit scales with extra attack power, whether from status, badges, or Mario's boosts, so you're doing more damage with multi-bounce in the long run. The tornadoes themselves can only be made stronger by equipping duplicate tornado jump badges, which really stings because that jacks up the FP cost a ton. This badge can be buffed in many different ways. One is to simply have the tornadoes scale to Mario's boots so that they do 3 damage with the Ultra Boots on. That alone would allow them to one-shot Grotus X's without guzzling your FP, which is at least something. But if we're being real, there's really not a good reason the tornadoes can't just benefit from attack boosts in general. So allowing them to power up alongside Mario being huge, power lift, or charge would also be a change worth considering, as now the badge would be a viable pick for the likes of Cortez and Magnus too. And while we're at it, allow Tornado Jump to deploy its tornadoes first before actually jumping at the enemy so that the tornadoes can eliminate enemy fog if it's present. That would make it a great support tool when RNG tries to meta with a plan of attack. For that matter, please let Tornado Jump clear fog away. If Flurry's Gale Force can do it, I don't see why Tornado Jump can't, when both are based on wind. If you enjoyed this video, you'll probably enjoy more of my other videos, so please do. The more you watch, the more money I make, and I'd really love to make more money, because everyone's got bills to pay and I'm no exception. Till next time, thank you for watching.